Hi, I'm Joanne Strevy from Rosewood Gardens in West Charlton. I'd like to thank the Clifton Park Half Moon Public Library for hosting this presentation on Anyone Can Grow English Roses. We have a lot of material to cover, so let's get started. Last time we talked about how roses need what people need. They need sunny location with good amended soil. They need plant food and nutrients, good air circulation because it promotes the health of the plant, and regular watering. This is Lady of Shalott. She's an apricot rose and she has a tea fragrance with hints of apple and spiced cloves. Roses also want what people want. They want clothing, health insurance, shelter, and friends. For roses, that means they want mulch to conserve water, regular spraying, winter protection, and I still think English roses look their best when they're planted in groups of 3 or more of the same variety. Today we're going to discuss regular spraying and winter protection. This is Brother Cadfael. He has a beautiful old rose fragrance and he has very large blooms. Keeping your rose healthy takes 5 major things. 1, you want to take the time to weed and preen. 2, clean up drop leaves under your rose. 3, proactively spray your roses. 4, deal with diseases or pests quickly. And 5, winterize your roses. You want to remove the weeds from your garden so they don't provide competition for your roses. I find that I weed about a square foot at a time, and that adds up, and then I use my Preen, which I think buys you some time because it prevents weed seed germination. And this is what your garden would look like if it's all weed-free and preened. And the preen, after it's rained a few times, will wash right into the soil, so you won't see the yellow there after that. This is James L. Austin. He's a beautiful deep pink rose with a fruity fragrance that evokes a blackberry and raspberry fragrance with hints of lemon zest and almond. It makes a nice rose for the front of your bed. When things go wrong, it's generally going to be because of disease or pests. We're going to discuss disease first. Rose mosaic virus might be something you've already heard of. It's a virus that is infected, or the rose is infected through propagation. So this happens long before you buy the rose. It doesn't happen at the nursery. There's nothing you can do to catch this disease. It often has no symptoms for many years. Although sometimes it causes serious damage, most of the time it's not a problem at all. It's not contagious. You're not going to pass this through pruning from one rose to another rose. The rose either has always had it or has never had it. And it'll stay that way from the time it is propagated until the time it dies. Most common in the spring and fall. It seems to go away in the summertime. And there's no cure or spray that's going to fix this. So your choices are either to live with the patterns on the rose or selectively remove them, or replace the entire rose if you're not happy with its performance. You want to proactively spray your rose with a fungicide to prevent disease before there is a problem. This rose here is England's rose. It has an old rose fragrance with a hint of cloves, and it makes a nice rose for hedging. The rose diseases that you can do something about and that you can prevent through proactive spraying, what I mean by that is spraying before you have a problem and not waiting until after you have a problem. The first one is black spot. The second one is powdery mildew. The third one is rust. And the fourth one is rose canker. Now the black spot starts as black spots on your leaves, and then they're surrounded by yellow halos, and then the whole leaf will turn yellow and fall off the plant. The powdery mildew is something you're going to find sometimes in the spring, and the rust down there, you can always identify that by the color, that nice orange color there. And then the rose canker, you always want to cut off the part that's dark brown like there. But all of these can be prevented by spraying proactively. So when you're going to spray, you want to spray in the morning. You want to spray the tops and bottoms of the leaves as well as their canes. And you're going to mark your calendar to repeat this on a 7 to 14 day basis, depending on which fungicide you decide to use. So what I do is I mix them up a little cocktail. I'll take 1 gallon of water and mix 2 tablespoons of Immunox fungicide by Spectracide and a big green spoonful of my Miracle Gro plant food. Mix them all up together and shake it and spray it all over the roses, on the tops of the leaves and the bottoms of the leaves, on the canes. Cornell baking soda formula. Cornell has promoted this as a good organic fix for fungicide, for black spot in particular. It's 4 teaspoons of baking soda, 2 tablespoons of horticultural oil, and a gallon of water. And you shake that up, and just like I did, you spray it on the tops and bottoms of the roses in the morning, and that should also prevent you from having black spot. It has to be applied every week, but it's one alternative if you want to go organically. Another one I found last year that I really have loved is the milk formula. It's 1 part milk to 2 parts water, and the kind of milk you use doesn't really make a difference. I started with a 2% milk, and my family didn't like the odor that it caused, so I went down to 1%, and I was happy with that. This is an organic method that prevents black spot, and the roses really loved it. It should be applied once a week and after it rains. I also add the Miracle Gro and Super-Thrive to my fungicide, to the water, and it really makes a difference. They just went nuts, and the leaves look dark green, and they were very, very happy with it. The other thing I do is in the spring I will apply this Bare Tree and Shrub Protect and Feed. It's a product that buys yourself some time. It's a granular product that you sprinkle on the ground after you've fed your roses. You water it in, and it's going to give you a little bit of time in case you can't spray every 2 weeks or every week. And I find that it by itself, it doesn't do enough of a good job, but combined with one of the other methods, it really, the combination works very well. And doing all this results in very happy roses. I'm going into quite a bit of detail about these things, so I want you to know exactly what works. But it's really not that difficult to do any of this. This is Olivia Rose Austin. It was named after David Austin's granddaughter, and it has many, many petals on it. It has a beautiful flower form to it. Rose pests. The main rose pests that you're going to run into are going to be aphids, spider mites, and Japanese beetles. If you run into aphids, they're going to look like soft-bodied insects that have they're either a pale green or a pale red. They're almost a translucent color, and you'll find them on new growth and new buds of your roses. If you see the picture there, they're crawling all over the place there next to the ladybug. Now, ladybugs are a natural predator for aphids, so if you can get your hands on a bunch of ladybugs, then you probably won't have any kind of an aphid problem at all. By spraying proactively, you don't even have, the fungicide's not going to touch this, but you could just take a hose of water and just spray a sharp spray onto the rose, and that should knock them all off. Another option is to take a teaspoon of Dawn dish liquid and 1 quart of water, and then spray or wipe that mixture onto the leaves, stems, and buds of the plant. This picture is provided by Kathy Keatley Garvey. James Galway is a beautiful rose. It has an old rose fragrance, and when it blooms, it kind of looks like it has a little petticoat to it. When I was trying to decide the best way to explain the spider mite, it came to my mind that it's very similar to the Itsy Bitsy spider. So I've decided to call it the Itsy Bitsy spider mite, so you can have that in your mind so you'll know when you come across this what you have to do. The Itsy Bitsy spider mite rested in the sun. This book is told and illustrated by Isa Trapani, and it was published by Whispering Coyote Press. And I just think it really captured very much the essence of the spider mite. The Itsy Bitsy spider mite loves hot, dry weather. It causes bronze leaves, and it has webbing on the leaves. Dawn, oil, and water wash the spider out, and the spider mite is persistent. So you're going to have to persevere by spraying every 7 days to make sure that you get the mites and any eggs that they may have laid. And keep that up until you don't see any more evidence of the spider mite. And this is what it looks like in real life. You can see it's got that fine webbing with the tiny little spider mites in there. They're very, very small, so they're hard to see. And then you see the leaves kind of getting crunchy and bronze. That's another good sign. And always best to, if you have a pest, always best to try to take a hose and wash it off. But with the spider mites, because they multiply so quickly, using a teaspoon of dish soap and a teaspoon of cooking oil to a quart of water and spraying that on them and wiping them off will make a big difference. And just keep at that until they're all gone. This is Tranquility. Tranquility is a beautiful rose that is white with pink buds. It has a light apple fragrance to it. Japanese beetles. I have a love-hate relationship with Japanese beetles. I love the way they look. They're very attractive bugs, but I don't like what they do to my roses. By far the best way to deal with Japanese beetles is to manually brush the beetles with your hands right into a cup of soapy water. So I take a quart-size Chinese food soup container, fill it with water, put some Dawn dish detergent in, swish it around so I make some bubbles, and hold it underneath the Japanese beetles and just kind of push them into the soap, and they kind of die in the soap bubbles. And then when I'm finished with catching them for the day, I'll flush that whole thing down the toilet. And then the next day they'll be back, but you can go out and do the same thing and flush them again. And that's the easiest way to deal with them. However, sometimes they can get out of control and they can completely take over your roses. And this is completely unacceptable to me. You wait for your roses to bloom, and to have them covered with these Japanese beetles is just not good. So at this point, that's when I'll start bringing out the big guns. And before I do that, I'm going to use some common sense. I'm going to wear long sleeves, pants, and shoes. I'm going to wear gloves and glasses. Wear a dust mask to cover your mouth and nose. I'm sure you can all relate to that right now. And I'm going to shower afterwards and wash my clothes. So I'm going to add to our rose cocktail. So if I use the Immunox and the rose plant food, then I'm going to add some 7 to that. And one of the things that happens is when you're using these materials and you have them stored outside or in a shed, the labels on them kind of get ratty after a while. So I'll take a Sharpie, like a silver Sharpie, and write the number of tablespoons per gallon that each of these things use. So Immunox, for instance, if it's 2 tablespoons, I'll put a 2 right on the black bottle. And 7, if it's 3 tablespoons, I'll put a 3 on that. And that way, I always know how much to put in a gallon of water, even if the label has gone bad. If you're using the milk and the rose food, you can add the 7 to that as well. And if you really don't want to use the 7, you want to go more organic, then there's something called Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew, which is an alternative. And by doing all these things, having that proactive spraying program, taking care of your roses are going to rebloom and be beautiful. This is Princess Alexandra of Kent, and she has a tea fragrance with aspects of lemon and black currants. It's an amazing fragrance and one of my favorite roses. We're going to talk a little bit about rosette disease. This is a deadly disease carried by a very specific spider mite. It's not carried by a hedgehog like the picture shows, but I thought that picture really captured the idea of how these creatures travel. Basically, an infected mite's going to drift on the wind. It's going to come into your garden and land on your rose, and then it's going to put the disease into the rose when it starts to eat. Or a non-infected mite is going to land on a rose that already has it. It's going to pick it up and then move it on to another rose as it blows in the wind. And it's going to infect that one. So this is definitely contagious. This is definitely deadly and something you don't want to ignore. The characteristics of rosette disease are it has a witch's broom foliage. You can see that foliage looks very different than the rose foliage around it. It almost looks like a witch's broom. It often has hyper-thorny canes, which we'll see a picture in the next slide, and the leaves are elongated and very close together, and it has bright red canes. Now you have to be careful because there are a lot of roses that have new growth that is red, but it doesn't have this kind of a form, so you got to be careful about distinguishing this one from just a normal rose that has red new growth. So here's the hyperthorny cane. You can see that it looks like it has normal thorns, and then in between that it has medium-sized thorns, and then small thorns in between that, followed by teeny tiny thorns in between that. It's just a crazy thorny cane, and it looks very different than any other kind of rose cane normally looks. So when you see this, what you're going to do is you're going to get a plastic bag, and you're going to cover the rose, and you're going to cut it off at the base and bag that rose and get it into the garbage. You're going to completely remove it. You want to dig out all the roots, get them out, get them into the garbage as well. Put it in the trash, not the compost, because you don't want this thing spreading to your other roses. And also you want to make sure you change your soil before planting another rose. I would probably wait 2 to 3 years before I put another rose in that spot. However, if you want to put a different plant, either a boxwood or a nepeta or something along that line, that would be fine. You could plant that right away because the rose rosette disease is not contagious to other plants other than roses. Heathcliff is a beautiful red rose, and it has a lot of petals, and it has a nice nodding aspect to it. It's tea fragrance with old rose and cedarwood. So keeping your rose healthy, you're going to clean up any drop leaves under your rose. You're going to take the time to weed and preen. You're going to clean up any disease quickly, clean up your pests quickly, and winterize your rose. You really want healthy roses going into winter. So make sure you're watering weekly in the summer. Proactively feed and spray regularly. And stay ahead of diseases and pests. Now, one of the best ways to make your roses rebloom is to make sure you're watering them, make sure you're feeding them, and make sure they're in full sun. Those are the three requirements that a rose really has to put out those blooms. You also want to make sure you're taking time to enjoy your garden. I know we've been talking a lot of technical things, and but make sure you take your time and sit in your garden and relax and enjoy it. It should be a place where you can just feel the stresses of the day fall away. We're going to discuss winterizing roses. This is one of my favorite pictures. I just think they look so cute. Those are the rose cones that are covered by snow, and I just think it's a beautiful picture. Kind of like winter sculpture. If you want this in the spring and not this brown dried up rose, then in late October, take all the leaves off of your rose. Just kind of snap them off going down the cane. Snap, 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 snap. And they will come off, and then you'll have naked canes. You want naked canes going into the winter. This is going to put the rose into dormancy. You're going to clean up any dropped leaves from the ground. Apply 6 inches of fresh mulch around the rose. And then tie the rose canes together with twine. You can tie it a little bit tighter than that if you need to. I also cut them down to about 16 inches because most of the cones you can buy around here that you're going to be covering it with are about 18 inches. So you have a little bit of space in between that and the top of the cone. And I'll take that cone at this point and make a cookie cutter imprint into the mulch, and then remove the cone and store it in my garage. I'll run around and find a couple of bricks to put next to the rose to make sure they're ready for when I do put the cone on top. In late fall, that's usually before Thanksgiving in our area, before you get a big ice storm or a big snowstorm. At that point, I go out and cover the rose with a rose cone and 2 bricks. And it's good like that for the winter. And by having the bricks right there, you can just pick them up and put them on top. The cone is going to fit right into its little frozen cookie cutter imprint. And they're set like that till April. The top of the rose cone has 2 holes. The purpose of those holes is so you can let out hot air in the early spring in case you get a really warm day. I also find that I like to go out in the winter through the snow and look down the one hole, and the sun comes in the other, and I can see those happy green canes inside, and it makes me look forward to the rose season again. And that's what they look like in winter when they're covered with snow. Winterizing climbing roses has always been a challenge for me. I have tried many different ways to do so. There's a difference between cane hardiness and root hardiness, and I live in the zone 4-5 area. And I have not found that David Austin's roses have been cane hardy for me, which is why we have to cover them. It protects the canes. Well, when you've got a really tall rose, it's hard to protect them sufficiently without smothering them. So I would recommend a couple different things. There's something called the Minnesota tip method, which I've never used because I haven't had the room for it, where you dig up half the roots and you tip the rose over and you cover it with mulch and you pin it down, and that's how they do it in Minnesota, and it works well for them. Another possible thing is if you want to hang on to a David Austin rose, you can just cut it down to the size and just grow it. Choose one that's a taller rose so it will get taller. It won't go up over the arbor, but maybe you could do that with a clematis and plant a clematis nearby. The third thing would be to go with a Canadian Explorer rose because they are cane hardy in zone 3 and 4, and so I think you'd have more success with them going up and over the arbor. Winterizing potted roses is much easier. The first thing with winterizing a potted rose, whether it's a shrub rose or a tree rose, is to make sure you're using a plastic pot, a large plastic pot. This is a 15-gallon pot I have this rose in. Now, the difference between a shrub rose and a tree rose is that there's 2 bud unions on a tree rose. There's one at the top of that big white stick, and there's one at the bottom below that big white stick. And they both have to be protected. So I would never plant a tree rose in the ground in our area. I would always put it in a pot and then just do what I've done here. I've wrapped the cane, the main cane there, with a white plastic tree wrap, and then I take downy dryer sheets and stuff them all the way around the bottom of the cones of the canes there, and then I wrap the whole thing up with twine to hold it in place. There's also, you can't see from here, but there's also a large stake behind that white cane, which is holding it firm in the pot. And then we're going to lay that down. Well, we'll water it first, and then we're going to lay them down, and we have a bunch of them, so I lay them down head to foot, and then we just go around and we just cover them with big leaves, or with not big leaves, with lots of leaves, big pile of leaves. And that has really helped. Sometimes we've had some pest damage from moles or mice or voles, and that's disappointing, but as far as the winter hardiness, that's not an issue. And this year I tried something different. I brought my tree roses inside, and I repotted them all in the same pots, but I did 2 per pot. So there's 8 roses in that room and in 4 pots. And that has worked out beautifully. I put some of the Bear protectant feed on top of the soil, and I haven't had any problems with bugs. When I originally had done this years and years ago, I had a problem with aphids in the house, and that was not fun. So I definitely think if you're going to bring plants inside, use that Bear protectant feed, and that will really help you to not have any problems. My only problem is that they've gotten too big. I've had to keep cutting them back, but that's okay. I'm not looking for roses this time. I'm just looking for them to survive and be happy when they come to spring. And you're going to make sure you're going to harden them off a little bit before you don't just bring them out and stick them in the hot sun. And I've got a little greenhouse attached to my house I've done this in, but I know people who've done this in patio windows, and they've been successful as well. Again, you're just trying to keep it alive as a house plant as opposed to trying to get it to flower. And the reason you do all these things is so that you can sit in your garden in the summer and enjoy your roses. This is so enjoyable for me to be able to enjoy the fragrances there, to see the different forms of the roses, to hear the fountain going, and it's something I love to have people over to enjoy it, and I love to help people to get this for their own houses. It's something that is really, like I said, the cares of the day just wash away as you're enjoying your garden. And I find that this is much more enjoyable than perennial gardening. I've got a big perennial garden, but this is where I spend most of my time. Here's some contact information for me in case you have any questions. Our website is visitrosewoodgardens.com, and you're welcome to contact me anytime. I'd like to thank you so much for sitting through and watching this presentation. It's been my pleasure to be here with you. We've gone through a lot of information, and it can be overwhelming sometimes, but you've always got this as a resource to come back to. And I hope that you feel that you could have the confidence to plant a rose garden of your own. Thanks again, and happy gardening.